All right. I think it looks like we're live. We're broadcasting, although I believe that I can only use one platform at a time when I'm doing this. So just bear with me. And it looks like I'm going to have to make one more adjustment for next week to uh, to get this thing going. So, all right. It looks like my sound is good. If you guys hear or see anything uh, that seems out of place, just feel free to leave a comment or a note or something. So I'll continue to work on improving my technological ability. And I hope you can forgive if I sound like I'm really stuffy. It's because I am. I just had surgery on my face, and well, I no longer have to wear what I've heard very graciously called a face tampon or a face diaper, a nose diaper. Uh, that's still very uncomfortable. There's a couple of big plastic tubes that they stick in there, and of course they might very nicely tell you. I love doctors for this. They very nicely tell you, "Oh, it's no big deal. We'll just, have the splits in there for a couple of days, and then we'll take them out." Um, and it wasn't until I watched a video of this um, that I realized exactly what it was that they were talking about. And what they were talking about certainly did not, to me, what I envisioned a minor split to be, or what it would look like. That would be in my facial cavity right now as I'm talking to you. So, again, this is Michael Gallipo. I'm a person in long term recovery. I'm a person in long term recovery who has been a participant in the state's medical cannabis programs. Uh, I got my start, as I told many of you last week, in California over a decade ago. So for me, this has become a very matter of fact, like kind of humdum order of business that it's become in my life. It feels very normal, and I recognize that for a lot of people, this is still not normal. They don't quite understand a lot of things, and there's a lot of misinformation and stigma to unpack. And I think that uh, having this space for us to come together and talk about these things is really important. Um, so I mentioned to you folks last week that I had wanted to get into some literature, and I just want to open because I've been in several dialogues with people about this throughout the week, and I think it's really important to point out that the way that I use literature and the way in which I study the different programs, I draw in them all differently, and I do that because I'm a person in recovery, and I believe my recovery is unique and it's very personal and individual, and it's going to be that for everybody, I believe. And the second piece with that is being able to uh, take care of my medical health in a way that promotes the highest functioning and the highest quality of life for me. And I think that as I became more well rooted in the values of my recovery, that I began to understand these things a little differently, and I've grown a lot over that time. This has not been, you know, it's been a growth process. I'll say that it's been very much a growth process. So again, this is one part of that journey. Looking forward to taking it together with you all, because there's certainly just as much that I can most likely learn from all of you, just as these conversations I've been having all week with people have taught me a lot about, what do people understand, what don't they understand, what do they believe, how does that affect how they make use of recovery. And there's some additional stigma I feel like to unpack around the abstinence based and 12-step programs. You got to understand that the 12-step, this is just my understanding of it. So I can't say that I speak for the 12 steps or for AA or any of those folks, but what I can say is in my experience, because I've lived a lot of different places, is that depending on the culture where you are, the recovery meetings are very different. The way that people interpret the literature is very different. And so I don't think that there is like a universal manual to how to do these things, right? So when I look at the literature that's out there, I try to separate myself as much as I can from the indoctrination, the beliefs, but rather than to use kind of a more objective process to examine what other people have said, uh, how can I identify with what they've said, uh, and to suspend my own judgment and belief for a minute, just to fact check and just say, okay, well, how is what is this perception? How do I perceive something like that? How do the two reconcile? What can I learn from that? Because I think at the core of most of these literatures that I've read about recovery is a very strong presence of narrative. Different people sharing their stories, sharing their experience, and as somebody who very much identifies with my Native American history, I very much respect the power of story and conveying, not even just conveying sentiment, but experience, knowledge, wisdom, healing, um, emotion. There are many things that we convey through story that becomes an effective vehicle for sharing some understandings. And the way that I interpret these, different literatures when I read them is I look at who wrote them, I look at when they were written, what was going on at that time when they were written. I really love to get into the history and to understand, like, what is that cultural perspective of the person who's writing, and whose cultures are represented, and whose cultures oftentimes are not. That's been another big part of the work that I've done in my more professional life, to start to do some video documenting and to start to expose some of these diverse narratives. And hopefully we'll get to share some of those with each other, through the process of having these meetings. I really would love to see some good dialogue with people in the weeks in between. So I've challenged the people that are out there, to not just turn away because they see this particular book or that particular book, because I'm going to go through a lot of different literatures. And the point being is that, with every one of these stories, the more stories I hear, I can get at more of the common truths by hearing more stories and more different stories. And then what are those truths for people in recovery? And particularly, what are those truths for people who are cannabis patients and seeking recovery? And what is the intersectionality there? Um, and so I just want to be frank with everybody here this week that I have no intention of doing a full segment, because I'm very much focused on my own healing, from this surgery, and it's taken a lot out of me. I spent a couple of days, bedridden, but I've been very, very, very fortunate that, because of how my life has changed so drastically, that, I could have several really profound life altering events happen simultaneously. And I can tell you this, that I haven't felt any desire to go to a bar and drink, to be resentful, like just at a fundamental level, to even be resentful. Um, and and I easily could have, but I feel like because I wasn't resentful about it, I didn't want to do it, and I just didn't want to do it. And I can't explain how my life has taken this turn, but here I am, and I can explain to you what happened to me over time and what I did and what I learned that helped me to get there. But sometimes it's not all linear. Sometimes several things can happen at once. Growth doesn't happen in like a very easy, structured format for most people. Um, Sometimes it's like that, where knowledge builds upon previous knowledge. But then sometimes there's these discoveries, these profound discoveries. And I feel like I've had a lot of those in the last about 5 to 10 years of my life. I've had a lot of those. Uh, and hopefully some of the stuff that we look at together will help you all to have more of those. And some of the things that I hear from you will help me to have more of those, because that's what the journey's been about. Uh, You'll have to pardon. I I have to continue to pad my nose because this post surgery thing. So don't mind me. Uh, so what I wanted to say to you all, first is that I apologize that I don't think I'm going to get into more of the structured study, just because I want to be in a good headspace when we do this, and I think that that's really important. And I wanted to get out here and I wanted to talk with you all this week, let you know that I'm still intending on doing this. My heart is 110% into doing this. It's been an incredible week, so I guess this is a really good opportunity for me to recognize some of the folks that have been helping to raise awareness for this movement and making this possible. First and foremost has been the encouragement and the support from my friend Wendy at Bulldozer Health. She's been doing educational shows on alternative health for a number of years now. And I've been a guest on her show. I'll be guest on her show later this year to kind of follow up on some of the work that I've been doing. There's been a lot of good things going on. So I'm really excited to visit with her, and I appreciate all of her help and support. I was actually really impressed. I saw the mental health advocate of Rhode Island had actually shared this group, and I think that's wonderful. I definitely would love to see, more patients coming forward and looking to turn to social support, because it's such a critical part of what we have as a society and as a species. There's a few good videos that I watched in the past week, and I'm continually impressed with the quality of some of the little like quick video media that comes out on Facebook recently, because there's been a lot of garbage, but then there's been some really really good stuff. There's this one video that came out, and this guy he's talking about how things are actually moving forward because of just how much frustration there is with people. And people get motivated to see things change, and how we've changed as a species, how we've evolved, sometimes works against us. Some of these baser instincts, and I think there's some intersectionality with that, with addictions. I think part of what addiction does is it works on the brain in a different way. It's an experience. It's a very powerful experience. Sometimes can be overwhelming when you're using the euphoria and some of the things that people experience, that I've experienced, can be something that acts within your entity, your identity, as something that almost takes over all other aspects of existence. You can become so locked into this moment in these little micro types of like behaviors and states of being, and people in recovery don't talk about this, but I feel like for many people in recovery, there are states of being that we got into when we used, that many of us seek spirituality to find again, right? And I know that's kind of a weird roundabout way of getting to it, but I feel like on some level, what people who have used substances do with chemicals, the monks in the Buddhist temple have found a way to do through stillness and meditation. And I feel like there is a convergence between the two. And we see this with the emergence of a spiritual-based recovery community, the very strong presence of that. And now, mind you, not everybody who needs recovery is a spiritual person or even wants to have more than a very basic understanding of what spirituality is. Or maybe they don't even want to understand, right? But there is a strong element to that. And I don't necessarily think it's because people in recovery need spirituality. And I think this is where some of the indoctrination gets mixed up, because people presuppose that because this group of people needed something, that's what all groups of people need, and that's not the case for any large enough group of people. We know that because people are all different. So, but what I see there is that there is this group of people that are very spiritually inclined, and whether it's repressed, they don't know it, they're looking for ways to express it, to experience interconnectivity, the most basic of, empathetic spiritual connection with people. I mean, I see, emotional wavelengths is no different than spiritual energy. I mean, it's energy. We're talking about the human being as essentially three different things. We have, our energy, which is also a part of this. And it's perhaps as simple as the signal that travels from synapse to synapse, but it's in those spaces in between. That's where the chemicals do their magic. And I'm not praising doing drugs by any means, but what I'm just saying is that there's something there. There's something in that space in between. And I think a lot of us get pulled back to that. And we continue to get pulled back to it until we figure it out, because that's what brought us there to begin with, for many of us. And so I think that comes up a lot. It does. What I encourage people to do, as somebody who's, my source of recovery has largely been through harm reduction, through helping other people, through educating other people, through trying to save lives and keep people safe, and just being a caring human being and doing my part, and not being a miserable human being. And I can tell you those simple changes in my life have been profound. I can say largely not due to any particular miracle, but just in that moment-to-moment decision making, day after day, when things can get me angry or drive me up the wall, or send me freaking racing through the streets like a maniac, that I just choose to not be that way. Moment to moment to moment to moment. And I try to really put in practice, how do I want to be treated? So how am I going to treat other people based on how I want to be treated? And really going back to that golden rule, as it's called. And I think that for a good-natured person is a reasonable baseline. And I don't believe that, with what I've learned in my lifetime, that all people are reasonably good-natured people. There are people that definitely are not reasonably good-natured people. And it's important to be able to kind of filter that stuff out. It can really put a bad taste on somebody when they go to a recovery meeting. They're looking for a particular kind of support, and then what they don't get is the support. What they find instead is a whole bunch more judgment, or a whole bunch more vulnerability, calling into question their own identity. Many things that can happen to people when they're vulnerable enough to take a risk, to go to a complete group of strangers, which is a terrifying experience, whether you're doing drugs or not. I think most of us, well, not most of us, but many of us, started using either alcohol or drugs at one point to be able to do better at that. And now here we are back at square one, where we're now asking ourselves to do it without that. And that was what largely brought us there to begin with. So it's very paradoxical, almost humorously paradoxical, that the first step that we ask people to make is probably one of the things that's more likely than not going to terrify them. And then we're going to put them in a room with a bunch of other people that are equally terrified, vulnerable, and loaded with various character flaws, because they're all human. And then we're going to expect everybody to have perfect conduct to get along. And it's just not reality. It's just not. Sometimes you come across some very fucked up people in rooms trying to work on their recovery. But that's the thing. We're not doctors and professionals and nurses and, well off, well educated. Even sometimes when we are well educated, we have a certain vulnerability around our own lives, where we somehow just miss our own behavior. We don't see it, even though it's right in front of us. Um, and this can particularly affect people who have preserved a certain image. So there's a duality that becomes established in a person's personality, where they have to maintain this sense of self and this identity in front of this group of people, whether it be for work or their social grouping, their family. There's expectations there, but they're very different social expectations when they're around the folks that they're around in the youth community. Extremely, sometimes very radically different sets of expectations, and then the two don't overlap all the time. So you could definitely end up with a number of people that could seem very, very judgmental, very, very quickly. And I would just encourage, anybody who's a person who's new to thinking about recovery, that I try to start as basic as possible. I start with harm reduction. And really every other step in the recovery process is just varying degrees of harm reduction. Continuing to make those changes that are, at a deeply personal level to improve the quality of your life and your global health and functioning. And, I think today I'm in a place where, I was able to avoid being rehospitalized by my surgery because of how terrified I was of these enormous things shoved up my nose. God bless for that. I didn't have to go back to the hospital. And I didn't have to eat all the medicines that the doctor gave me. I could stop taking them when I didn't need them anymore. And some people in recovery will tell you that's not really possible, because how do you moderate if your lifestyle dictates abstinence? And I think it's not as simple as that. I think, depends on what you're doing, right? So if you have a relationship with a doctor, you have to deal with medical issues, and it's something that the goal is to improve your global health, and you're doing it in a partnership, and you have some accountability there. I think that's reasonable. I think that a lot of folks who use different forms of MAT, not even just medical cannabis, but other products that are out there, they experience a similar discomfort because of this transference by the abstinence community, that particular path happens to be the only path, or even the only way to use the 12-step literature. And I guarantee you, if you bear with me and you give me the benefit of the doubt, I can prove to you that there's a whole other way to use this literature. And I don't know if it's what the writers intended, but I feel like there's a lot of really good stuff, really choice nuggets in the literature. There's certain places we have to step back and evaluate the process for the individual. I think for some people, a process of powerlessness is helpful. This came up in a recent dialogue, but again, it's not a one-size-fits-all for everybody. And there are certain groups of people that have been studied, that they've looked at. What are the inherent flaws of the what this program delivers, what the 12-step program delivers more specifically. And part of that was, they were working with groups of, particularly vulnerable women in the city of Chicago. It was a work that was published by William White, NADAC scholar, and he talks about how hope, and in particular how hopelessness, really can create a more fundamental obstacle than a person's need to admit their powerlessness. And so without the existence of hope and the presence of internalized hope, that to ask somebody to admit they were powerless in a state where they feel completely and utterly powerless because they're completely and utterly hopeless, it's not a productive way to begin rebuilding somebody's life, and to work meaningfully and productively on what their needs are in recovery. And I think that's really important for us to look at. We can use part of the inventory process here. There's a few other tools that I like to use to just kind of understand yourself, because I think a big part of this process and this journey is really getting a better understanding of yourself, getting to know yourself, like up close and personal, as much as you can. And this is where I go back to the monks, because our journey is their journey. That's what many of these folks set out to do. It's not to seek what is outside, but more closely, what is this that exists within, and who are we, and what are we, and all these really incredibly powerful, definitive types of questions that people can spend lifetimes in pursuit of. And I think it is the noblest of pursuits. And when we take a harm reduction framework for recovery, we can start to embrace many different pathways, many different strategies, many different ways in which people seek and find recovery, particularly medical cannabis. For many of us, it is by far the least invasive or least harmful form of treatment available. I'm among that. I was able to come off of 13 pills a day, quit smoking cigarettes, quit drinking alcohol, with the help of a little bit of cannabis. And I think that if that is over the course of years, of course, it took a process of transition, but the vast majority of the last 12 years of my life have been mostly abstinent. And I don't even consider the maintenance that I use to not be abstinent, because I'm of what you would call a sober-minded body. And I don't know if maybe we can find a better word than sober, of a whole or healthy, happy, more of those kinds of things. I don't tend to picture that when I picture sober, but for me, it's about being in the moment. Being able to enjoy life, being able to love what I want to love, and be where I want to be, and do the things that I want to do, and be happy and be proud of myself. And really be able to have something that is special. And I think that exactly is what I saw with the last week as I've been going through this surgery. Talking about an experience of powerlessness. Coming out of that surgery, I was sent home with an instruction to make sure that I could have somebody stay overnight and watch me breathe in my sleep, because there was a chance that I could die in my sleep. And I had enough support and love around me, and I'm not even in the same state as my born blood family. They're not nearby, but this community that's come around me, and I feel as though it's the same community that we all want to have, that we all want to be able to share together. And a big part of doing this every week is to give all of you folks out there some space to come in, get to know me, get to know my story. We can learn about each other's recovery and get to some better understandings of them, but also to break down a lot of the barriers that are keeping people separate. Like, I don't need to judge other people based on their form of recovery. If you do your recovery differently, that's okay. That's perfectly fine. I'm perfectly open to hearing what your recovery sounds like, because I might learn something from that. And that open-mindedness, that curiosity, has been something that's brought me to where I am now. It's brought me to all of you. And I hope I can share a little bit of that, about that curiosity. Because life can be hard enough. You don't need to be making it harder on our own as people trying to just live better lives and be happier and be healthier. And that's really at the core of what recovery is all about, is happier and healthier. I heard it said a long time ago, a friend of mine from one of the meetings, a friend of Bill, he told me, he said, when I walk up to the church and I hear a bunch of people laughing, he's like, I know that's where I want to be. And it's so true. You know, I want to be where all those people are. I want this page, this group to be where all those people are who are laughing and celebrating. So I'll probably do some fun things for you guys, over the course of this journey. I love to share my music with people. Very creative. Maybe we'll make some clothes together and sage my house. There's a bunch of different things that we can do. We don't just have to sit here and read books. But I think that part of it is sharing what we've learned. And I want to start to break down some of the stigma that's out there, because there's a lot of things that I've learned from that have really helped me in a genuine sense, and not in like a religious cult sense. Like, not even rebel. I'm like the furthest person from somebody who religiously ascribes to anything, except maybe the universe. I don't even know how you could call that religious. And I think it's really important to say that, I don't treat other people that way because I don't want to be treated that way. And if we can all agree to do that, then we can learn a lot more from each other. We can start to put aside, some of our past experiences where, maybe these things had, come into negative context, and it caused us to feel challenged, to really be open to learning and understanding and examining. And I do respect that there are going to be people who, don't believe that my way is the right way for them. But I just want to emphasize that, my way is not going to be the right way for anybody but me. But what does happen is I can share my narrative, what I've learned, to walk people through that journey, and they can learn how to make adjustments on their own journey based on my lived experience or based on other people's lived experience. And I think that's how we've evolved as a species. I mean, that's how we've persisted here for so damn long. It's not because we were physically superior. It's not because we didn't get sick less than anything else. It's because we knew how to communicate and learn and adapt from each other. It's what has made us literally the most advanced life form or organism on this piece of rock in space. And our ability to do that has now been increased exponentially with the advent of the internet. And I'm so grateful to be here with you guys to really embark on this new journey together, because, boy, the possibilities. It brings a twinkle to my eye. I feel like totally, absolutely, I can't even put this into words. I'm not comfortable by any means, and I'm very hopeful. I'll take energy if you guys are sending that my breathing problems will be a thing of the past, and the next time we speak, I'll be in much better spirits, and I'll be much more comfortable, and I can start to hopefully share with you guys a little bit more about what I've learned. I suppose I can take out this little book here, because there's a few choice citations in here. And maybe I'll just flip through it real quick and see if I can grab one or two. No, I'm not quite ready to jump into this yet. Okay. I feel like I'm still jumping too far ahead. Maybe I'll go back to the beginning here. When I look back on this red book, I don't want to get into the diagnosis yet. So, I'm not going to get into this one yet, but this one has some pretty nice citations. And I like to look at how people reword or rework ideas in the recovery programs. I love looking at literature that critiques or examines other literature about recovery, because I find that, sometimes somebody will say something a little bit differently that I hadn't quite thought of that way. And so I'll go back and I'll re-examine it, and I'll find some other newer meaning. And these meanings change over the course of my life, right? Because we're always learning new things and integrating new things. And so I feel like that's also very important. I definitely want to give a big thank you to, my friends that have been checking in on me. My gosh, boy, what a godsend. It's been a rough week. Not being able to breathe is a really terrifying thing. But the only thing I could compare to it was that there was one day, and maybe it wasn't one day, but more a blur of days, because that's probably more likely, where I realized that I couldn't, no matter what I intended to do, I couldn't stop myself from drinking alcohol, which it's hard to describe something like that to somebody who hasn't experienced it. I don't know what I could equate it to, but it's like having two different levels of your mind and realizing that one part of your mind has lost control of the other part of your mind. And so things happen at a pace that your intellectual mind, at least where I was at this stage of my life, my intellectual mind couldn't keep up with. It would happen so fast that I would have a drink in my hand before I even realized that I was getting a drink. And that feeling to me, it was like I was constantly trying to catch up with myself. Where I would just do something and then not realize till after it was already done that I was doing it, and then have to go back and try to figure that out. I think as I've gotten older, it's gotten easier to manage that. I think for a lot of young folks, it's really hard for people to do. So I just want to share that. I think about that sometimes, and I'm very fortunate. I'm very, very blessed that I don't have to live that way now. So yeah, this next couple weeks is going to be really exciting. I'm going to be leaving in October, taking the show on the road, going down to the National Harm Reduction Conference the second week of October. Hopefully going to hear back from the founder of the Students for Sensible Drug Policy. Hopefully going to be taking a trip out to Vegas to spend some time with all of them. A lot of really exciting things happening. I feel like, the more I focus my life on positivity, the more I've surrounded myself with positivity, that the more and more and more the blessings just pour out onto my life. And that's really been my biggest lesson on this journey in recovery, is really to look at the way that I think about things, the way that I choose on a certain level. Now, maybe not everybody feels this way now, but what I've learned over time is that I choose to feel a particular way. Because I can have something genuinely bad happen to me at this stage of my life, and instead of it being horrific or a disaster or a tragedy, like having surgery. I mean, nobody enjoys the feeling of being bedridden for days on end, and being too overwhelmed with healing to even get up, to be feeble and weak, and need other people to care for you. But just the outpouring of blessings that came out of that, because of how grateful I was, and because of how much love I put into this world, that love came back, and I was kept comfortable. I was kept safe. I didn't have to drive myself to surgery. I didn't have to drive myself home from surgery. I didn't have to stay alone in my house. In fact, I had a very, very pleasant young woman who was very kind to help me with that. And she works in an operating room, so I felt very comfortable with that arrangement. And I couldn't have asked for more. I really couldn't have. The people who were sending me prayers and well wishes and all these things. It's just, you know, I could have been so upset about it and complained and been miserable and blah, 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 blah. But the bottom line is, that's not what I want to spend all my time on this earth doing. And I think as more of us begin to discover what recovery is for us, for each of us, yeah, I feel like what we find as well is we get to be more of our genuine self, or the best version of ourselves. And we get to be the person that we want to be all the time. And it doesn't matter what the world sends at you. The amount of times that I've had my own, my living and my ability to sustain myself called into question, and relationships that broke down for me over the past couple of years. And I mean, there's been some tough stuff, but I'm happier now than any other point in my life, because I know that there is an overwhelming amount of people in my life that love me and support me, and I care a great deal about all of them. And the wealth that I have in love and interconnectedness on this earth is worth more than any amount of money or physical goods or anything else that I could have had, really. And now I get to share all that with you guys and to have more of it and to create more of it, because that's how we do it. We create it together by doing this, by opening ourselves up to each other, by sharing with each other, by caring about each other, and being there for each other. And I think that's what I'm learning, at this stage where I'm at in my recovery. It's not, for a little while, it was all about me. I had to do some selfish things sometimes, and people didn't understand. It felt unreasonable, but, you got to understand, people trying to recover from addictions are afraid. It's hard. It's high stakes. People tell you, you fail, you're going to die, and then they shame you, and they make you feel terrible for it. It's one of the hardest things to do, because your every instinct when somebody treats you that way is to prove them right. Because it's going to make you feel better. You're going to forget about them. You don't have to worry about it. The people where you're going are going to accept you because they're all in the same place as you anyway. And it's easier to do. And it should be. We as people, in society and people, particularly in recovery in society, we should at least get this. That's not the way to do it. That's not how you heal hurting people. You gotta be patient. You gotta be understanding. These aren't people that, have done particularly well for themselves overall, for the most part. Some of us have, but, some of us have had some real struggles. We've been broken in ways that go way beyond using drugs or alcohol. And some of that stuff takes years for it to all come together. My own journey through healing and all of this, I'm still going through procedures, I'm still going through treatment, I'm still going through big life changes. That didn't stop. But the way that I handle it has changed a lot. And what I can choose to do now instead has changed a lot. And then what happens after that? It took me a long time to realize what I needed to realize, but I think that's what this journey is about. Is that we can share these things together, and that hopefully something clicks, something deep inside yourself helps you to find the best version of yourself. And each and every day we make that step forward, we commit to it. Even if we have a few setbacks, that largely once we commit ourselves to that, heading in that direction with our lives, that things continue to improve for us. Sometimes in ways that we don't expect. The things that I value now at this stage of my life, with this amount of time working on myself through the process of recovery, uh, I don't value the same things. The things that I would have said absolutely not. I'm not going to do that because there's nothing in it for me. Um, that base mentality of evaluating my life's activities and choosing what I do with my time has fundamentally changed. So I no longer am motivated by the same things that motivated me when I was using it. And I think that some of those motivations are very common for many of us. A lot of, and I've heard this said before, our society is a sick society. And I think on some levels, well, I'm definitely more of a glass half full type of guy. Uh, there is a lot of just lack of emphasis on wellness. We don't emphasize people taking good care of themselves. We continue to ask people to do more with less and to continue to take on more, even if it's not healthy for them to be taking on more. And then we pressure, we shame them for not being able to own up to that. And as those pressures continue to increase, we've seen a pretty steady parallel line between people having troubles with addiction and other life stressors, whether it's economic, whether it's traumatic, either early childhood or adulthood. That there's a lot of these common core factors, things that exist in a person's life that lead to a particular type of behavior. And more oftentimes than not, it's almost as though we've designed, a system to do this, and then built shame in around it to keep it. They say because people are less apt to talk about what makes them ashamed, and then you add a little bit of power dynamic, a little bit of out-group marginalization, and you have a perfect cocktail for where we're at as a society dealing with addictions. And we're not even just talking about substance addictions, but any form of addiction. Process addictions are one of the most common occurrences in the human behavior realm, because there's just such a heavy preference for humans to be able to self-soothe, self-regulate through routine. And routine is one of those things that works with our primitive brain. The part of the brain that tells us to get up at this particular hour, to do this particular thing, to run when we hear a loud noise. And so there's some parts of the brain that still they have not really fully found their way into being integrated with our evolved state of being as a civilized species. So, a big part of this too is how do we understand ourselves in a way that embraces how different we really are, even internal to ourselves. We can have a very intelligent, rational, well-educated individual that presents, very well for one part of the brain. And this is kind of the traditional scenario of the qualified drunk, as it were. But for all intents and purposes, with this one particular circumstance, where this individual starts to become exposed to alcohol, and very quickly we see a meltdown in the way that the person conducts themselves, and the way that the person behaves, and how the person maintains their relationships, regardless of how they feel about it. And something changes. And I just want to emphasize to people out there that, the human mind and body is so incredibly complex that we still have not begun to really fully understand all of the things that play into how we are, why we are, the way we are. Because we've evolved over billions of years, and we know this. This is science. And so we've become these incredibly complex creatures that have now changed very rapidly. the way that we organize ourselves, sociologically, technologically. Our lifespans have more than doubled over the course of the last several hundred years. We're genuinely a much different species than what we were even a few hundred years ago. And I think the problems that we're facing now, the challenges that are unique to our version of this species, are things that are emerging out of conflict, and two different kinds of conflict. And one of them is internal, that has to do with evolutionary resolution. And we haven't fully evolutionarily resolved the presence of some subdominant traits, or sometimes they're even dominant traits that are maladaptive, but yet they're passed on with a degree of heredity. And so we have that continuation of the internal conflict between the primitive mind and the sophisticated intellectual mind. And that's an oversimplified way of explaining it, because the brain has so many more different sectors in the way that it plays off each other. But just to try to put it in a way that's somewhat comprehensible, that is kind of the way that I would equate it. And then the other piece of that is the way that we've chosen to live as a society. We haven't really thoroughly engaged in like a meaningful and planned conversation about like how are we going to continue to live on this planet the way that we're living on this planet. There's a lot of uncertainty about the future of our species, and I think that there is some deep-rooted fear that underlay all that, and some people act out in futility when they can't forecast or foresee their own reasonably predictable future. And the challenge now is that so many people don't have confidence in the future of our species, and it plays off of this internal conflict between the primitive mind and the modern mind. And we also see it play out in our society. We see it in the patriarchal the patriarchal type of society, where people are trying to ascribe to a different type of belief about how humans should exist because of our evolutionary history. And I don't necessarily agree with that particular philosophy, but yet it exists. I can talk about it because it does. It exists. And there are other forms of evolutionary dissonance, where we as creatures have not fully reconciled all the different parts of ourselves and the way that we've changed very quickly, very drastically, and it's been a little bit traumatic for us as a species. And I don't think we name it. I don't think we talk about it. We're quick to point a finger at the wars and the other traumas that are going on, but I feel like a lot of those are exaggerated by these pronounced differences and these really extreme periods of not tragic, but drastic growth and change that really is happening at such a level that it's hard for people to keep up. It's hard for people to keep pace with where we're already at, never mind where we're going. And there's so much information to consider. So what I hope I can do for a lot of you, and it does look like I managed to survive yet another hour, impressively. And so what I hope I could share with you is to look at some of the history, some of the tools. Now let's talk about the evolution, because I think that's the really important stuff, because we have a lot of really good historical knowledge, and it's been compounded for us. But we've been very locked into this one type of belief system, and I think that we as a species have evolved, and as a society have evolved enough to have more genuine dialogues about what it should look like. How can it be more inclusive? Like, what can we do to better support each other as people in recovery? And why is it necessary for me, a person who, my struggle with the 12 steps, in that we identify with either NA or AA, but I definitely identify as both. And you tell me till you're blue in the face that I have a substance of choice, but I had just as big of a problem with crack cocaine as I had with drinking alcohol. And I was definitely doing crack cocaine without no alcohol. I was definitely doing alcohol without no crack cocaine. And there were other things that I've been addicted to that weren't even substances. And so it's not even about that. Because the same freaking thing for me worked for all of it to deal with it. And that's probably where I'm at. Even the cigarettes, same damn thing. Um, and so I'm grateful for everybody to, come out here and listen to me again this week. Again, apologize. I wanted to take a little bit more objective approach this week, but my focus is on gentleness and healing, and I really appreciate all the love that everybody's sent to me during the process of getting through this. I'm really excited to have this Bevo. I really like the quality of the video. I hope you guys at home like the quality of this video. I hope the audio is sufficient quality, and you guys can hear me just fine. I feel very quiet for me. I usually have a pretty booming voice. Yeah. So I don't really want to keep dragging on for the sake of keeping to an hour. So I'm going to go ahead and call it a night. But I would love for you guys to, start some dialogue in our group, and continue to bring those questions, and let's look to start making some steps forward on this journey together. All right. Thank you everybody for joining me this week.